Hi, my name is Hank. For several months, my team conducted an investigation, gathered facts, and interviewed witnesses. Robert Anderson, a 33-year-old construction business owner, and his 29-year-old wife, Amber, seemed to lead a perfect life. Married for 5 years, their outward appearance of a strong and loving relationship was bolstered by their comfortable lifestyle and well-kept home. Yet beneath this veneer of success, Amber felt increasingly isolated. Robert's obsession with his business left him working long hours, often returning home late, exhausted and disengaged. Amber, once an integral part of his life, now felt sidelined. Despite her attempts to voice her loneliness and disconnection, Robert dismissed her concerns, focusing instead on the promise of a better future through his relentless work. Amber felt lonely. She wanted connection, conversation, someone to share her thoughts and feelings with. But Robert was always busy, always distant, and Amber was left to fend for herself. She tried to fill the void with hobbies and interests, but nothing seemed to fill the emptiness she felt. She felt like she was just going through the motions, playing the role of the perfect wife, but not really living. Robert's announcement that his younger brother Nate was returning to Ridgewood after years of traveling the country didn't thrill Amber. She had always seen Nate as a bit of a troublemaker, someone who was reckless and irresponsible. But Robert was excited to have his brother back, and Amber couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy. Why was Robert so eager to reconnect with his brother, but not with her? When Nate arrived, Amber was nervous. She tried to talk to Robert about her concerns, but he just laughed them off, saying she was being paranoid. Amber wasn't so sure. She saw something in Nate that made her feel uneasy. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she sensed that Nate was trouble. As Nate settled back into the house, Amber watched him with a mix of curiosity and wariness. He looked the same as he always had, charming and carefree, but there was something in his eyes that made her feel like she was the only one who really understood him. She saw the recklessness in his gaze, the sense of danger that lurked just beneath the surface. Amber felt a shiver run down her spine as Nate smiled at her, his eyes crinkling at the corners. She didn't know what to make of him, but she knew that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. She tried to push the feeling aside, to focus on her daily routine, but she couldn't shake the sense that Nate's arrival was going to disrupt her life in ways she couldn't control. Amber found herself growing more and more anxious. She didn't know what to expect from Nate, but she knew that she didn't want to get caught up in his drama. She tried to stay out of his way, to avoid confrontations, but she couldn't help but feel drawn to him. There was something about Nate that was magnetic, something that made her want to be around him, even though she knew it was a bad idea. Amber's feelings were a jumbled mess. She didn't know what she wanted or what she needed. She just knew that she couldn't keep living like this, feeling so empty and unfulfilled. She needed something to change, something to shake her out of her complacency, and Nate's arrival seemed to be just the thing to do it. Amber found herself growing more and more accustomed to Nate's presence in the house. At first, she had been annoyed by his carefree attitude and lack of responsibility, but as she got to know him better, she began to see a different side of him. She saw the way he made Robert laugh, the way he brought a sense of excitement and energy into the house. Despite her initial reservations, Amber found herself starting to enjoy Nate's company. She would catch herself smiling at his jokes or laughing at his silly antics. She even started to look forward to his presence at dinner, enjoying the way he would regale them with stories of his adventures on the road. Robert, too, seemed to be enjoying his brother's company. The two of them would spend hours talking and laughing together, reminiscing about old times and making plans for the future. Amber would watch them with a mix of happiness and sadness, feeling grateful that Robert was so happy, but also feeling a little left out. Amber found herself growing more and more comfortable around Nate. She started to see him as a person, rather than just a nuisance, and she began to appreciate his unique perspective on life. She even started to feel a little protective of him, wanting to help him out and make sure he was okay. One day, as she was cooking dinner, Nate came into the kitchen and started to help her. They worked together in silence, chopping vegetables and stirring pots, and Amber felt a sense of ease and comfort that she hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if they had known each other for years, rather than just a few weeks. As they finished up dinner and sat down to eat, Amber caught Nate's eye and smiled. He smiled back, and for a moment, they just looked at each other, a sense of connection and understanding passing between them. Amber felt a flutter in her chest, and she quickly looked away, trying to brush off the feeling. She didn't want to feel this way, didn't want to be attracted to her husband's brother. But as she glanced back at Nate, she saw the way he was looking at her, and she knew that she couldn't deny her feelings any longer. Over the next few days, Amber found herself growing more and more aware of Nate's presence. She would catch herself looking at him, admiring the way he moved, the way he smiled. She even started to feel a little jealous when he talked to other women, feeling a pang of possessiveness that she couldn't explain. As she lay in bed at night, Amber would think about Nate, wondering what it would be like to be with him, to feel his arms around her, to taste his lips. She knew it was wrong, knew that she was married to his brother, but she couldn't help the way she felt. And as the days turned into weeks, Amber found herself falling deeper and deeper under Nate's spell. She knew it was a mistake, knew that it would only lead to trouble, but she couldn't help herself. She was drawn to him, like a moth to a flame, and she couldn't resist the attraction any longer. Amber found herself becoming more and more entangled in a web of deceit and desire. She couldn't help the way she felt about Nate, and she couldn't resist the temptation to be around him, to spend time with him, to get to know him better. But as their relationship deepened, Amber knew that she had to be careful. She couldn't let Robert find out, couldn't let him suspect that she was developing feelings for his brother. So she played a game of cat and mouse, always careful to keep her interactions with Nate private, always mindful of the need to keep her secret hidden. It was a delicate balancing act, one that Amber knew she couldn't maintain for long. She was torn between her loyalty to her husband and her growing attraction to his brother, and she didn't know how much longer she could keep up the charade. Meanwhile, Robert seemed oblivious to the tension between Amber and Nate. He was happy to have his brother back in his life, and he was enjoying the time they spent together. But as the days went by, Amber began to notice that Robert was changing. He was becoming more and more possessive, more and more jealous, and Amber knew that it was only a matter of time before he discovered her secret. One day, as she was out running errands, Amber ran into a friend of Robert's. They chatted for a while, catching up on old times, and then the friend mentioned something that made Amber's heart skip a beat. "Robert's been asking questions about you and Nate," the friend said, a sly smile spreading across her face. "He's starting to get suspicious, Amber. You need to be careful." Amber's heart sank. She knew that she had been playing with fire, and now it seemed that she was about to get burned. She didn't know what to do, didn't know how to react, but she knew that she had to think fast. As she made her way home, Amber's mind was racing. She knew that she had to come up with a plan, had to figure out a way to keep Robert from discovering her secret. But as she walked through the door, she was greeted by a sight that made her blood run cold. Robert was sitting on the couch, a look of fury on his face. Nate was standing opposite him, a look of defiance in his eyes. And Amber knew in that moment that her world was about to come crashing down around her. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to sound calm, but her voice shaking with fear. Robert turned to her, his eyes blazing with anger. "I know what's been going on, Amber," he spat. "I know all about you and Nate." Amber's heart sank. She knew that she had been caught, knew that she had no way out. And as she looked at Robert, she saw the hurt and betrayal in his eyes, and she knew that she had lost him forever. The air was thick with tension as Amber stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes locked on Robert's furious face. She knew that she had been caught, and she knew that there was no way to escape the consequences of her actions. "How did you find out?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Robert's eyes flashed with anger. "I've been watching you, Amber," he spat. "I've been watching the way you look at him, the way you talk to him. I've been watching the way he looks at you, the way he touches you." Amber felt a shiver run down her spine as Robert's words cut deep. She knew that she had been caught, and she knew that she had no excuse for her behavior. "It's not what you think," she tried to explain. But Robert cut her off. "Don't lie to me, Amber," he shouted. "I know what I've seen. I know what I've felt. You're my wife, and you're supposed to love me, not my brother." Nate took a step forward, his eyes locked on Robert's face. "Robert, calm down," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Let's talk about this." But Robert was beyond reason. He was consumed by anger and hurt, and he couldn't see anything except the betrayal of the two people he loved most. "You're a liar, Amber," he spat. "You're a cheat and a liar, and you're going to pay for what you've done." Amber felt a surge of fear as Robert's words hung in the air. She knew that she had never seen him like this before, and she didn't know what he was capable of. "Robert, please," she begged, trying to calm him down. "Let's talk about this. Let's work through this." But Robert was beyond consolation. He turned to Nate, his eyes blazing with anger. "And you," he spat. "You're my brother. You're supposed to be my family. How could you do this to me?" Nate stood tall, his eyes locked on Robert's face. "I'm sorry, Robert," he said, his voice firm. "I never meant to hurt you. I never meant to betray you." But Robert wasn't listening. He was consumed by his own anger and hurt, and he couldn't see anything except the betrayal of the two people he loved most. With a sudden movement, Robert lunged at Nate, his fists flying. Amber screamed as the two men clashed, their bodies crashing to the floor. The room erupted into chaos as the two men fought, their anger and hurt boiling over into violence. Amber stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes locked on the scene before her. She knew that she had never seen anything like this before, and she didn't know how to stop it. She didn't know how to calm Robert down, or how to make him see reason. All she knew was that she had to get out of there, before things got any worse. She turned and ran, her heart pounding in her chest. As she fled the house, Amber knew that she had left behind a scene of utter devastation. She knew that she had hurt Robert beyond repair, and she didn't know how to fix it. All she knew was that she had to get away, before things got any worse. As Amber ran out of the house, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had escaped the chaos and violence that had erupted between Robert and Nate, and she was finally free to think and process what had happened. But as she walked through the streets, her mind racing with thoughts and emotions, she realized that she had no idea where she was going or what she was going to do. She had left behind everything she knew and loved, and she was now alone and adrift in the world. As she walked, the reality of her situation began to sink in. She had lost her husband, her home, and her sense of security. She was now a woman on the run, with no clear destination or purpose. Amber felt a wave of panic wash over her as she realized the enormity of her situation. She had never been on her own before, and she didn't know how to take care of herself. She had always relied on Robert to provide for her and protect her, and now he was gone. As she walked, Amber stumbled upon a small cafe. She went inside and ordered a cup of coffee, hoping to gather her thoughts and calm her nerves. But as she sat down at a table, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over her. She thought about Robert and Nate, and the violence that had erupted between them. She thought about her own role in the situation, and how she had contributed to the chaos and destruction. And she thought about her future and what lay ahead. As she sat there, lost in thought, Amber realized that she had a choice to make. She could continue down the path of destruction and chaos, or she could try to rebuild and start anew. But as she looked around the cafe, Amber saw the faces of the other patrons, and she felt a sense of disconnection and isolation. She didn't know anyone, and she didn't have anywhere to go. She was truly alone, and it was a terrifying feeling. Just as Amber was starting to feel like she was at rock bottom, she heard a voice behind her. "Amber!" She turned to see Nate standing behind her, a look of concern on his face. "Nate," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I followed you," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "I was worried about you." Amber felt a surge of emotions as she looked at Nate. She was angry and hurt, but she was also grateful to see him. "What do you want, Nate?" she asked, her voice firm. Nate took a deep breath before speaking. "I want to help you, Amber," he said. I want to help you rebuild and start anew. Amber looked at him skeptically, unsure if she could trust him. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw something there that gave her hope. Okay, she said finally. I'll let you help me. And with that, Amber and Nate set off on a journey of self-discovery and healing. They faced many challenges along the way, but they also found moments of beauty and joy. As they walked through the city, Amber realized that she was finally starting to heal. She was finally starting to let go of the past and move forward into the future. But just as things were starting to look up, Amber received a call from an unknown number. "Hello?" she answered, her voice cautious. "Amber, it's Robert," the voice on the other end said. "I need to see you." Amber's heart sank as she heard Robert's voice. She knew that she couldn't avoid him forever, but she wasn't ready to face him yet. "What do you want, Robert?" she asked, her voice firm. "I want to talk to you about what happened," he said. "I want to try to work things out." Amber hesitated, unsure of what to do. Part of her wanted to try to work things out with Robert, but another part of her knew that it was too late. "I'll meet you at the park at 5 p.m., she said finally. "But I'm not making any promises, Robert." As she hung up the phone, Amber felt a sense of trepidation. She knew that she was about to face her past, and she wasn't sure if she was ready. As the sun began to set on the small town of Ridgewood, Amber made her way to the park to meet Robert. She had been dreading this moment all day, unsure of what to expect or how to react. As she arrived at the park, she saw Robert sitting on a bench, his eyes fixed on her as she approached. He looked tired and worn out, but there was a determination in his eyes that made Amber feel uneasy. "Amber," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Thanks for coming." Amber sat down beside him, trying to calm her nerves. "What do you want to talk about, Robert?" she asked, trying to sound neutral. Robert took a deep breath before speaking. "I want to know why you did it," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I want to know why you cheated on me with my brother." Amber felt a surge of guilt and shame as she looked at Robert. She knew that she had hurt him deeply, and she didn't know how to make it right. "I was lonely, Robert," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was lonely and unhappy, and I made a mistake." Robert's eyes flashed with anger. "A mistake?" he repeated. "You call sleeping with my brother a mistake?" Amber felt a wave of fear wash over her as Robert's anger boiled over. She knew that she had to calm him down, but she didn't know how. "Robert, please," she said, trying to placate him. "Let's just talk about this calmly." But Robert was beyond reason. He was consumed by his anger and hurt, and he couldn't see anything except the betrayal of the two people he loved most. As the argument escalated, Amber realized that she was in grave danger. Robert's anger was spiraling out of control, and she didn't know how to stop it. Just as she was starting to feel like she was trapped, Nate appeared out of nowhere, his eyes fixed on Robert's angry face. "Robert, calm down," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Let's talk about this." But Robert was beyond listening. He was consumed by his anger and hurt, and he couldn't see anything except the betrayal of the two people he loved most. With a sudden movement, Robert lunged at Nate, his fists flying. Amber screamed as the two men clashed, their bodies crashing to the ground. In the heat of the moment, Robert picked up a nearby wrench and struck Nate with all his might. Amber watched in horror as Nate's body crumpled to the ground, his eyes frozen in a permanent stare. As the reality of what had happened sunk in, Amber felt a wave of shock and grief wash over her. She knew that she had to call for help, but she couldn't move. She was frozen in place, unable to process the horror of what she had just witnessed. And as she looked at Robert, she saw the realization dawn on his face. He had killed his brother, and he would never be the same again. The sound of sirens echoed through the night air as Amber finally found her voice. "Robert, what have you done?" she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. But Robert just stood there, his eyes fixed on Nate's lifeless body, his face a mask of horror and despair. After Robert killed Nate, the police quickly arrived at the scene and began investigating. Amber was in shock, unable to understand what had just happened. The police collected evidence and interviewed witnesses, including Amber. She told them about the events of that night, but her words were jumbled and contradictory. Robert was taken into custody, but the police couldn't find enough evidence to charge him with murder. Amber was shocked when she learned that Robert might be released from custody. But then the police received an unexpected call from an anonymous source, who provided new evidence. The evidence was a security camera footage from a nearby building, which showed Robert's car parked near the scene of the crime, with a clear view of the license plate. The footage also showed Robert getting out of the car and walking towards the park where Nate was killed. The police were able to enhance the footage and get a clear view of Robert's face, which matched the description provided by Amber and other witnesses. The anonymous source also provided a statement from a witness who had seen Robert arguing with Nate earlier that night. The new evidence was enough to charge Robert with murder. The trial was set for several months later. Amber was called as a witness, but she was not prepared for what she saw in the courtroom. Robert looked like a completely different person. His eyes were empty and lifeless. The prosecutor presented the evidence, which pointed to Robert's guilt. But Robert's lawyer presented an unexpected argument, which put the entire prosecution's theory into question. The jury was divided, and the decision was made only after lengthy deliberations. Robert was found guilty of murdering Nate, but the sentence was unexpectedly lenient. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison, but with the possibility of parole after 8 years. Amber was shocked by the sentence. She felt that Robert should have received a harsher punishment. But at the same time, she felt pity for him. She knew that he was destroyed by his own guilt. Amber left the courtroom, feeling mixed emotions. She knew that she would never forget Nate and what he meant to her. But she also knew that she had to move on and rebuild her life.